Thank you very much. And I am indebted to the organizers for inviting me. This is a wonderful event. Let me start from the beginning. Let me show you my understanding of the development of computer science. So for a very long time, computer scientists were thinking about the computer. It is both hard to believe and embarrassing that intelligent adults for so long were thinking about the computer, okay? But we did, okay? And we were obsessed with the computer. As you know, this changed. The last 2 decades or so, the internet came around, and since then, we all realized that the computer is just the little gadget that brought us the internet, okay? And our object of study is really the internet. And my point is that this had a profound transformative effect on computer science, in the following sense, that first of all, suddenly we became a natural science. We didn't design the computer. Up to that point, we had been studying things that we designed, but the computer sort of emerged. It was a gestalt. The internet was a gestalt. And nobody designed it, and so we had to approach it with the same puzzled humility with which other sciences approach their objects, and study it with experiments, observations, falsifiable theories, and the development of new applied mathematics. Also, another transformation, computer science became a social science because the computer, the internet has a lot to do with people, right? I mean, we have to understand their incentives, their preferences, their behavior, their quirks, their business plans, in order to understand the internet. And so, by studying the internet, that's my point, we ended up, in some sense, studying the universe, okay? So, and admit that you never noticed how similar the internet and the, okay? So, and when I say the universe, I mean that slowly computer scientists embolden themselves to start thinking about scientific problems in other sciences. That's what I mean by the algorithm as a lens of the sciences. Okay, so here is why. Here is the reason for this. In the long years we spent studying the computer, we developed a special kind of thinking. We call it algorithmic thinking, but I mean, it's a different way of scientific thought that has some penetrating power and some zeitgeist. And as a result, every time a computer scientist thinks seriously about an interesting problem in another science, occasionally, I'm not saying always, I'm not even saying often, but occasionally, a very interesting insight results, okay? And I want to show you examples of this. Some of this you know. In the late 80s, people observed, original computer scientists, that phase transitions, the amazing, the mysterious phenomenon in which the global parameter, the global behavior of a large system of interacting particles can be transformed radically by a small change in the parameter. That these are tantamount, mathematical equivalent, coterminous, with the sudden change in the speed of convergence of certain algorithms. And this was an incredibly productive observation. And as a result, a new community, a new joint community has been formed, and you see phenomenon like computer scientists proving theorems in statistical physics and statistical physicists coming up with ingenious algorithms for difficult constraint satisfaction problems in computer science. So this is a fantastic success story that opened the road for more. And of course, even before, we have quantum computation. So this was a result, you suddenly realize that certain physical systems require an exponential number of parameters for their description. And there are two ways to react to it. Either you are a conscientious scientist and you panic, or you are Richard Feynman and you turn it on its head, okay? So, by the way, this paper, occasionally I teach a course where we call it Reading the Classics, where we read the dozen best papers in the history of computer science. And I consider, Simulating Physics by Computers, the 1982 paper by Richard Feynman, to be one of the classical papers of computer science. So computer scientists don't have the monopoly on the lens, okay? So, as you know, after this, with this stimulus, a sequence of events started in which eventually the theoretical quantum computer was defined, and there are groups everywhere trying to build it. But let me show you a quote from my former colleague and friend. I just realized that's better than colleague and former friend, right? So yeah. So Umesh Vazirani, and so that quantum computation is not so much about building computers, but really probing quantum physics. Okay, so let's go to economics. Okay, so let's go to more tough territory, so unknown territory, unfamiliar territory. As you know, Nash's theorem in 1950, showing that every game has a Nash equilibrium, was an equilibrium. He didn't call it Nash equilibrium. Was a turning point for economics. Okay, so Myers, or Roger Myers, another Nobel Prize in economics, wrote in 1999 that Nash's theorem is the beginning of modern economic thought. Here is why. Because Nash's theorem that every game has an equilibrium is a license to economists all over the world. When they study a new situation, an institution they're designing, a market, to stop and think, let's say, what happens at equilibrium? Okay? And of course, Nash's theorem is important for this, because if it doesn't exist for some games, then you don't have a license to say it, all right? So, here is what computer scientists did. So, it turns out that Nash equilibrium is an intractable problem, okay? And now, many of us are cynical about intractability, okay? What does intractability mean in practice, okay? It's true. So, that sometimes it means that obscure instances that will never come up in practice are difficult to solve. In practice, it often does mean much, but in theory, and remember what I said, this is a theoretical tool, okay? So, as a theoretical tool, this is devastating, okay? This says that if the complexity world is as we think it is, then Nash's theorem is as if it was saying that almost all games have a Nash equilibrium, okay? And if this was Nash's theorem, I guarantee to you, economics would be a very different place. Okay? So, further afield, evolution. Okay, so as you all know, Darwin didn't understand evolution very well. Okay, so there has been a lot of much of our understanding of evolution, such as it is, has been done since then. Jacques Monod said that evolution is a field that has the highest ratio of people who think they know something about it and people who actually know about it. You know, on a bad day, I think that this ratio is infinity. Okay, you know, so the point is that 150 years after Darwin and 80 years after the modern synthesis of mathematics, of genetics and Darwinism through mathematics, we are still don't know an amazing amount of stuff, okay? And for example, what is the role of sex? What is the role of recombination? Look around you. We are very different. If selection does its job, why doesn't it focus on the right genotype? You know, in fact, theory predicts diversity that is 1 or 2 orders of magnitude less than the diversity that we observe in nature. Okay, so we don't understand why. And also, here is a sort of, you know, an old obsession of evolution theorists. Can you find the Lyapunov function of evolution? Okay, what is evolution optimizing? Obviously, it's not optimizing fitness, okay, because we know that. But what exactly is it optimizing? So, here is a computer science way of saying this. What algorithm could have created all this in a mere trillion steps? Trillion is the number of generations since the beginning of life. Okay, so you can think of it as the steps of evolution. So a trillion may sound like a large number, but if you think about it, your cell phone has done 1 trillion steps since the beginning of my talk, and has not accomplished much. Okay, so it's not a big number when it comes to algorithms and computers. Okay, so so here is a sort of, you know, a very shallow analytical observation. Okay, you take a very standard model of evolution, you specialize it to a regime, a revolutionary selection regime that is quite accepted. Okay, it's the selection regime in which the selection strength is very, very small. Okay, and it is widely accepted that that ordinary evolution, this is how it proceeds. And basically, you get this equation. Okay, so it's really after elementary school, elementary analytical manipulation, where by xt I mean the frequency of allele 1 at generation t. You have a haploid algorithm, a haploid organism. You look at one gene, it has 2 alleles. So x sub t is the frequency of allele 1 at generation t. You know, I'm writing the simple equations, or, you know, we can prove it for more general cases. F1 super t is the relative fitness of allele 1 in the present genetic environment. Okay, as you know, an organism is affected by the environment, but a particular gene also experiences the genetic environment created by the other genes. Okay, by the current frequency of alleles of the other genes. Okay, so, and of course it's divided by some normalizing constant z. Once you look at, you know, again, my friend Umesh Vazirani, when we look at when we wrote down this equation, we were stunned. Okay, and, you know, Umesh said, now I have more confidence in evolution. Okay, you know, and the reason is that this equation is a multiplicative weights update algorithm. It is an algorithm that computer scientists have learned to love and respect, because time and again it solves problems that it does not have the right to expect to solve. Okay, you know, so it's extremely simple, and it solves problems like complex programming and network congestion. Okay, so and it's stunning to find this algorithm sort of, you know, hidden in what evolution does. And furthermore, you know, pursuing this line, you realize that what xt plus 1, this formula, is precisely the x that maximizes this potential function, okay? And this potential function is basically the relative fitness differential between the two genes added over all previous generations, multiplied by the frequency of the first gene, times a term, a regularizer, which is the entropy of the distribution. Okay, so I mean, it's sort of interesting that entropy is something that that the gene has in mind when it optimizes its distribution. So recall the questions, and I think that this little observation has a lot to do with all of this. What algorithm, I think it's the multiplicative weights update algorithm. What is the role of sex? My biology co-authors don't want me to say that, but I'm convinced that the role of sex is that it enables the multiplicative weight updates algorithm. Okay, so why all this diversity? Well, I don't know, but the potential function that selection maximizes has a entropy term. Okay, and is evolution optimizing something? I don't know, but I know what every gene is optimizing in the weak selection regime. Okay. Finally, coming to my main topic. The last 3 years I've spent trying to understand the brain, and here is one way to admire the problem. Okay, babies do a lot of amazing things. Computers do a lot of amazing things. There seems to be no intersection. Okay, and the same can be said about deep nets and the brain. And the real disconnect is between the amazing amount of information that you read every week about the brain versus any overarching understanding we have of how the mind comes out of this. Okay, so this is, I think, an amazing question. Okay, in fact, I think of it as a sunset from the Berkeley Hills question in the following sense, that every time I see this site, what I have in my mind is, why isn't everybody stopping what they're doing and come here to see this? Okay, so every time I think about the brain, this is the mood I am. Why is anybody working on anything else? But I know we all think this way. Okay, but this is new to me. Okay, so and I believe the answer will be, once we found, it will be at least partially computational. So I think it's a good idea for computer scientists to work on the brain, but it's a very tough to start. But so let me tell you, this is David Marr. He's not a computer scientist. He's a cognitive scientist, a brilliant cognitive scientist. Who died early. Who was my colleague at MIT when he died, and he proposed the posthumously published paper, the 3 steps program, which specs, in other words, what is, if you want to study a brain system, you have to study the specs, which you get from neuroscience experiments, which is, what is the input-output behavior you expect from the system? Then you speculate about the hardware, and then you come up with the algorithm, the process that puts the hardware together in order to produce the specs. It's a very simple recipe, but let's see how you... So let me give you specs. This is a recent experiment that inspired me. They recorded from a patient, and they presented a few images to them. For example, this particular, let's focus on one neuron and one patient. Okay, so this neuron, every time the patient sees the Eiffel Tower, it fires. Okay, You show them other things, doesn't fire. You show them the Eiffel Tower, it fires. They show them Obama, doesn't fire, okay? He was the president, okay? Then they do the following. They Photoshop Obama in front of the Eiffel Tower, okay? And of course, the neuron dutifully fires, okay, because it sees the Eiffel Tower. Then you show the Eiffel Tower, it fires, the Forbidden City, nothing. Obama, it fires. You see what I mean? You know, my eyes get watery when I say this. I mean, you know, this guy has learned that Obama has been to the Eiffel Tower. Okay, and basically you found that experimentally. Okay, so you know it's sort of amazing. In any event, what is the hardware? What is the algorithm? This is joint work with neuroscientist Wolfgang Maas and my colleague Santos Vempala. So let's speculate about the hardware. And they recorded about 200 cells out of 10 million medial temporal lobe cells, neurons, for every subject. They showed about 200 pictures, and they had about 10 hits. What this tells me, okay, they can't be so lucky. What this tells me is that each memory must be represented by an assembly of neurons that is quite large, let's say 30,000. And this is not a new idea, it's a very old idea whose time has come. It's highly connected, therefore stable. It is somehow formed by sensory stimuli, by some attention mechanism, you form a memory. Every time we think of this memory, approximately all of these neurons fire, and two memories can be associated, means sort of coming closer to each other, if they're presented, if the stimuli are presented together. By the way, these cells are called Jennifer Aniston cells, okay? And they have been observed for about 25 years now. How many of you know about Jennifer Aniston cells? Okay, so the rest of you now have Jennifer Aniston cells, okay? You know, so that, you know, think about it, okay? But don't go this way, okay? All right. So, what's the algorithm, okay? How are assemblies formed and how does association happen? Okay, so, and here is something that computer scientists will appreciate, that this creates a big challenge, right? I mean, in a sparse random network, how can you select a densely connected subnetwork? Okay, this looks suspiciously like the Clique problem, a problem we have learned to respect and avoid, okay? So how do you do that? So here's how I think it happens, that the stimulus fires, and after a while, an assembly of 30,000 neurons emerges. And of course, these are scattered neurons, even though, so you know, remember. Okay. And how about association? These Obama and Eiffel fire together, and then the corresponding assemblies come together. So this is my conjecture. And the question is, how do you prove such a theory? And maybe math. So let me show you our model. You have two large sets of vertices. They are, let's call them sensory cortex and MTL. The synapses form a random graph with very little small, you know, independent probability between any two nodes to be connected. Initially, all synaptic weights are equal. We have discrete time. A set K of sensory neurons fire for a small number of steps, the presentation of the stimulus, we call that. At each step T, the K neurons that have the largest synaptic input from either sensory or medial temporal lobe, they fire, the K largest. And plasticity means, you know, so you know, it features in the strategic plan of ICTS, but it's in our brain. If at time t a cell fires and at time t+1 cell j fires, then the weight of synapse ij increases by a small amount. Okay, so what can we prove? I'll give you a quick qualitative narrative because I'm running out of time. The set of currently firing cells will rapidly converge to a limit A. It consists of cells that we call born-rich. We have high synaptic input from the stimulus, direct synaptic input, and hybrid cells that have good enough synaptic input from the stimulus, but also synaptic input from the born-rich cells. And these two, A and B, will result in the first two steps. And then you have a small number of late recruits. It will be highly connected, and if the same stimulus presented again, all of A will fire. After the sequence of presentations, Eiffel, then Obama, then Eiffel plus Obama, then Eiffel, then Obama, a small but not vanishing set of cells in the Eiffel assembly will also respond to Obama and vice versa. And in addition, a very small number of cells will respond to the combination, but not to either. And I guess I'm rushing now. One of the most interesting things that in all this enterprise is that the results become stronger under a more realistic random model for the brain, which is the following: that we call it GMP++. That conditioned on these edges being there, the probability of this edge being there is not p, but it's 10 times p. This creates a very interesting set of phenomenon of Berthe paradox, whereby these cells are not random because they come from they are the projection of cells under GMP++. In any event, recall the Clique challenge. How do you find a sparse GMP graph? I asked my students, nobody came up with people who specialize in such problems. Nobody came up with an algorithm that is as clever as what I think the brain does. And here's what the brain, a stylized version of what the brain does. You pick a random set of a few vertices, and then you complement with vertices that have the most edges from those. And then you optimize alpha. And of course, here are some tricks that the brain can do that we can't do. You have plasticity and GMP++. Okay, open problems, and I'll finish here. Are combinatorial completion biases like GMP++ a crucial part of the way the brain works? Okay, and this is, I think, a very tantalizing question. We find them everywhere, but we don't know. Can a mechanism similar to the one described, and this is sort of where my real interest lies, be a part of the brain circuit for building syntax tree to understand language? Okay, so I'll leave my conclusions. Let me congratulate ICTCS for 10 wonderful years and wish them another 10. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Fascinating. Questions? Yes.
Just a question on the Nash equilibrium. Can one make a case that human brain is so limited that it just posits, it can only absorb few parameters, small models, so NP hardness is not relevant in the kind of games that we are solving?
Absolutely. But I sort of said that. Yeah, indeed. It does mean much, okay? But what I'm saying is that modifies Nash's theorem, okay? In view of my theorem, Nash's theorem says that almost all games have a Nash equilibrium, okay? And this is a sea change, because as I said, the Nash's theorem is a theoretical tool. It's not a practical tool, okay? It's not about people, it's not about, okay? But you have a good point.
Other questions? No? Yes, there.
No, so in your last line, you say ultimately language. So do you have some preliminary remarks on how this framework could be used to discuss the emergence of language?
Certainly, yes. I'm glad you asked this question. Thank you. Okay. Yeah. It's much more pleasant answering a question than stealing 3 minutes from this guy. Okay. So, okay. So there has been a deluge of incredibly interesting results. Okay, recently, sort of recordings from brain while processing language, that they all point to the fact that they all point to the conjecture that there are brain. I can. If you want, I can tell you sort of. If there are astounding results that to me clearly signify that we do build trees, syntax trees. Okay, they are not what Chomsky thinks they are. Okay, so they are slightly different. They are significantly different, but there are trees in our brain. Okay, there are trees in the language area. Okay, and I think that so here is a possible architecture, right? I mean, the MTL where Eiffel Tower lives is where our lexicon lives. Okay, so every time we hear, so every time we want to generate or parse a sentence, what happens is that we find these words. It's a wild conjecture, wild speculation. We project them to the superior temporal gyrus, which is the workspace where language happens, and they sort of there are processes I don't understand or try to understand, which sort them out, which one is the object, the verb and so on. I mean, they are projected in appropriate areas of the SDG, and then I'm pretty sure that a merge happens. Okay, so the merge happens in Broca's area. Okay, so in what I call there BA 43 and 44. Here is one finding that I think is really striking. There are fibers, neural fibers, in other words, neural superhighways going from SDG to Broca's area, and these superhighways are myelinated. They are offered to public use at near the second year of the baby's life. Okay, so exactly when the baby has enough words and starts to use syntax. Okay, so the Broca's area is kept pristine until then. Okay, so and then so all these things point to me that the time is ripe to start articulating conjectures of how trees are built in the brain. Okay, so and I think that the little mechanism I showed you, which has been verified experimentally by our group and others and so on, so is something that could be valuable there. Okay, thank you very much.
Well, thank you. That's